What's going on, everybody? It's Carmine from Barmine Tech. Today we're going to be working with Proxmox, and more specifically we're going to be working on clustering our Proxmox nodes. So if you're not familiar, all we're going to be doing is making it that all the nodes are going to be joined together in the GUI. We're going to be able to manage and work on them all out of one GUI instead of having to jump between different nodes. So if you're somebody like me who has multiple Proxmox servers in your house, this is just an easier way to manage all of them at the same time. We're not going to be doing an HA or high availability or Ceph or anything else today, just because I don't have hardware distributed amongst the Proxmox servers to be able to do like high availability or Ceph or any of that other stuff. So today we're only going to be clustering them, and maybe in the future I'll be able to do like a high availability Proxmox server. But let's get right into clustering up our nodes. During my research and looking at how to do this, it does seem that when you want to cluster your nodes, the best way to probably do it is when you have a fresh Proxmox server. You can do it with an existing Proxmox server, but it seems that if it has VMs on the machine, it seems to not work properly. It seems to fail out, so it won't join. What I would recommend doing is either have backups of all your VMs somewhere else, whether you use Proxmox backup server or some other method. You back up to like a NAS or something like that, and then you can remove those VMs, and then when we're done clustering it, you could restore the VMs and continue on with what you're doing. It's all up to what you want to do, whether you want to do a fresh Proxmox or you want to just remove your VMs. I have seen a method where you can go in and you can remove the conf file. Personally, I'm not comfortable doing it that method. I know it probably works just fine, but I'd rather not remove the configuration files out of Proxmox and have to risk it when I have backups of my machine. So this is why I really recommend using some sort of backup system, whether it's Proxmox backup server or you back up to a network share or a drive or something like that. That would probably be your best bet if you have an existing Proxmox server for this method if you want to cluster them up. But enough rambling, let's get into how to cluster the Proxmox nodes. So over here you can see I'm in my Proxmox environment. Over here we have the Barmine Tech server and my mini lab server. So I'm still in the data center. When I come over to my summary, you can see I can see both of the nodes at once. So I can come over here and I can untruncate this a little bit. I can see the node IDs, their IPs, some of their system specs, and it joins them over here. So I can see the health, I can see the virtual machines, what's running, and it's also given me the CPU specs, like the resources used. I think it's funny, it joins everything together. So like I have 5 terabytes, it says, between the two nodes. But that's what it's going to look like joined together. We actually have another one of my Proxmox servers. This is my old tower server, and we're going to join this together to make it the third in the cluster. So all I did was make sure everything's up to date on all the servers, so it's just easier to rule out any errors. So I just ran the updates, so everything's good on here. Like I said, I have a VM on here, so I'm going to try to run it and see if it'll join, but if it errors out, I'm just going to remove this and then we'll pick it up from there. So over here we're on my mini lab server, and this is where I have my 2 clusters. So over here we're on data center. I'm going to come over to cluster, and you can see over here I have my clusters Barmine Tech, and I have my 2 nodes. So I already built out this cluster, but I'm going to show you how to build out your own cluster. So I'm just going to come back over to my other server. I'm going to click on data center, node, and this is what you would see to start off when you need to build your cluster. So you can either join a cluster or create a cluster. So I'm going to click create a cluster. You would name it, and then you would set the IP address that you want the cluster to use. So if you want to use this main server, you could set it to use that. So like my server right now is 192.168.50.24. So it would be 192.168.50.24. That would be the cluster ID, the cluster network, and then the other nodes would be joined over. So you'd be able to access all the nodes out of that cluster IP. I'm not going to do that because I already have my cluster made, but that's how you would set it. You would just set create cluster, and then it would pop up with some information that looks like this. So it's going to give you the IP address, a fingerprint, and the join information. What we need is the join information, so we can just click copy. We can come over to our node that we want to join to the cluster, and I'm just going to come back over here and click join cluster. We're going to put in the join information. Now you can see that the box opened up with some more info. So it's going to give me my peer IP. So this is the IP address of the existing cluster IP. I know it's going to probably get a little redundant with the cluster and the peers, but just try to bear with me with this. So this is the IP of the machine that's formed on my cluster array. So this is my mini lab IP. Over here it's going to ask for the password, so you just need to enter the password for that host. So like I'm on mini lab, I'm going to put in my root password for my mini lab. If you're on whatever server you're running, you just need to put in that root password to use to log into that server. it autofills the fingerprint, and then the only thing left to do is set the IP you want to use for the node you're joining to the cluster. So for me, it's that 24 address, and you can see it's actually up here. If you want to change it, you probably can, but I'm just going to leave it default. And that's just showing you the peer link address. So again, this is the one that has the existing cluster that we're joining. And you can see over here it says join Barmine Tech. So I'm just going to click join. And you can see over here it actually failed out because I most likely have that VM running. So I'm just going to close this out. We're going to power it down. We're going to try again. So like I was saying, the best way to try to join a cluster is like a fresh Proxmox install or a Proxmox node that has no VMs currently running on it. That's what I'm finding is the best way to do it. We're going to be testing out in this video to see other ways to do it, whether I have a VM already existing or a running one, so you can join with a running VM. But now we're going to try with a VM that's off and see if it still fails. Okay, so that VM's done powering down, so I'm just going to come back up to data center. We're going to try joining that cluster again. Just going to fill out my info. We're going to set the IP, and we're going to try joining again, and see it fails out again. So we're just going to delete my VM, and this is where if you have Proxmox backup server, it's really helpful because if it's already backed up, you don't have to worry about it, and you can just restore it whenever you're ready. One thing to keep in mind about making these nodes a cluster is that they can't have overlapping IDs for their VM numbers. So if I come over here, I know I'm digressing a little bit. So there's no VMs currently in Barmine Tech, but you can see Minilab uses 100. So if I use 100 in my one node, my other node's gonna have to use 200, and then my other node would have to use 300. Or you could use like 25, 30. They can't overlap pretty much. So I can't have 100, 100, 100. I can't have like 101, 101, 101, just for like an example. So I would probably use a naming scheme of like 100 on one, 200 on another, and 300 on another. But that's enough of that. Let's go back to joining the cluster. So I'm just going to data center again, paste the information, put in the password, and then we're just going to click join. And you can see over here it's actually going through the process to join now. So from what I'm finding, if the config files are present, this is what it's going to have the issue again, so you could take those out. Like I said, I saw a video where it talks about just removing the config files and putting them back in after it joins. Personally, it's just not worth it for me. I don't want to risk bricking everything, so that's why I would just back up the VMs and then restore them when I'm done. So this is working over here, and if I come over here, you could actually see that it's starting to propagate. So what happens is it's joining the cluster and it's running through setting up the server and everything else. So it might get hung up at some point. So if you're sitting here for, let's say, 5-10 minutes, you're most likely hung up, and you can come over here and you can see that it actually is already set, and you can see I'm starting to get some connection errors in the background. So that's this new server node going through, it's restarting the cluster processes, because you have to remember it's using a system service to run that cluster. So it's going through, it's resetting those services, it's probably going to reboot your server at some point. But if you start seeing like it's green over here, you're probably good. So I'm going to refresh this page. You can see that all my servers are online over here, and this one's most likely just hung up. So I'm just going to refresh it, and here you go. I got the security warning. So the service is most likely rebooted, and that's what happened. So if I logged into here, you can see I am also in the cluster over here, so I can access it from either node. Now, the idea of this is that I could just access everything out of my Minilab, so it just makes it easier for me, but it's a cluster across, so you could do it either way. So I'm just going to close out that one, and now you can see that I have all of my Proxmox nodes in a cluster over here. So this is how we would cluster our nodes. Now, I am going to talk about some of the other details. Like I said, removing nodes is a little tricky. There's no set, like click on it in the GUI and remove it. You do have to do it in the command line. So we're going to go over some of the commands. So I'm just going to open up the shell on one of the nodes, and we're going to work on what I would do as one of the nodes I don't want to remove. So I want to keep Minilab in there, but let's say I want to remove Challenger. So I'm going to go in there and we're going to show how to do that. So I'm just over here on the Proxmox doc for cluster management, and they have all the setup how to do it. So you could actually set up a cluster through the GUI like we just did, or the command line. The GUI is probably going to be a lot easier. We move down to removing nodes. You can see there's actually a different command. So there's a PVECM nodes. where it's just going to show you the node info. So I'm just going to click clear. We're going to do PVECM nodes. And now over here you can see the nodes that are in the cluster. So I have my Homelab, the Barmine Tech server, and Challenger, and then their node IDs. So like I said, I want to remove Challenger from the cluster, so we're going to attempt to do that. It does suggest powering it off and making sure that it's not going to power on with the same network information as it previously did, because it will work to rejoin the cluster. We're going to attempt to remove it, but like they even say that the best way to remove it from the cluster is do a fresh install. So unfortunately there doesn't seem to be a great way to remove a node from a cluster. I wish there was better support, because it would be nice if you're somebody like me who we build out servers often, and if I wanted to cluster them up, it's a little bit easier to get rid of it, but currently that's how we do it. They do have an option on separating without reinstalling. I'm going to give it a try maybe another day, but today we're just going to work on using these simpler commands, and I just want to see if it works. So like I said, we want to remove the Challenger, so over here we would have to connect to the shell of one of these other two nodes. So like I said, I'm connected to Homelab, and that's the machine we're going to be working out of. I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to power down Challenger, and we're just going to give this a second to power down, and then we'll pick back up running the commands. Okay, so Challenger just powered down. You can see over here I have a red X showing that it's offline. So I'm just going to come back over here so I can get the commands. And then you can see over here, if I run that command again, that Challenger is gone. So what we're going to do is we're going to do PVECM del node, and then we're going to put in the node name. We're just put in the node name, and then we're just going to hit enter, and we're going to see if this works or not. So you can see it has an error and says that it doesn't exist, and that's okay because it actually mentions that in the documentation. So it says at this point, if it is possible, you'll receive an error message saying that could not kill the node, the error that we just got. This doesn't actually say that it's a failure, but that you can't sync up because it's offline. So it can be ignored, and then over here you can see the status again of the cluster, and you can see that Challenger is actually gone. So you can see we actually removed it from the cluster, and I wonder if I refresh it if it'll show. And you can see over here that when I refresh it, it's actually gone. So one thing that I did find out last night while I was testing this is because Proxmox clustering uses like a quorum system. So to have quorum, you need one more than two, or however like the technical term is they have for quorum, or one more than half, or something like that. I forget what it is, but it's irrelevant. But if you only have two nodes, you don't have quorum. So you can't remove nodes when you only have two in the cluster. So that's why now I would be stuck. I would have to actually uninstall or do a fresh install to get rid of, let's say, the Barmine Tech server. So just keep that in mind, that if you only have two nodes in your cluster, you can't remove one without doing like a fresh install or something like that. But you can see over here that the server's gone. We were able to remove it, and it actually worked well for us. So that's just how you would add and remove nodes from your cluster. So that's Proxmox clustering. That was how we set up the cluster. We add nodes to the cluster, and how we can remove nodes from the cluster. So like I said, it's a little tricky just because of how the VMs work and how the clustering actually works. Like I said, make sure you have backup of your VMs, whether you're using Proxmox backup server or you're backing up to like a NAS or something else, just so you can make the clustering a lot easier. Like I said, I don't like removing config files and risking corruption or anything else breaking in the process. So I'd rather be able to just remove them and restore them when I'm done with the actual cluster setup. That's how we set up a cluster, and this is also how we can remove a node from a cluster. So I hope you guys found this video useful. I hope you build out an awesome Proxmox cluster in your Homelab, and if you do, comment below what you're running in your Proxmox cluster. And again, I just want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.